Hello and welcome to the Peace Talk, this time with Raul Sanchez Cedillo. Raul Sanchez Cedillo is a Spanish philosopher, political activist, author, translator, and also political analyst. Dear Raul, I thank you very much for your time and that you followed my invitation.
Thanks to you, Josef.
Let me begin with the question, with maybe a personal question. What did motivate you to write this book? Did you feel that there is something not analyzed yet? Or did you had the concern that maybe this war is going to escalate in one way or another? Or what was actually your motivation?
Both. I mean, on the one hand, we were getting out apparently of a pandemic, global pandemic, that from the human, societal, political point of view had proved the absolute incompatibility between capitalist neoliberal governance modes and the needs, the basic needs of life, production and reproduction of life. So, as we all know, that tragedy created mostly in an used to Western world a psychic catastrophe that also was nurturing reactionary proto-fascist modes of behavior. We saw much of that in the anti-vaccine interventions and movements, in the sense of a paranoical mode of interpreting reality and the contradictions of reality. So on that basis, we had all forgotten of the most of, even activists in Europe, of the Ukrainian situation and the post-Soviet situation. It wasn't my case because from in that period, yes, I have to say yes because of the pandemic and the whole entailments of it. But since 2011, with the movement of the Indignados in May 15 movement that started in Spain, the European problem was key, because we knew that without the European movement, also in Eastern Europe, couldn't really transform reality and political structures. And that meant that I met lots of activists across Europe, and in particular from Ukraine. And that coincided with the Euromaidan and the contradictions of the Euromaidan. So the binary, Lager position and description of that conflict was not only untrue, but absolutely dangerous from the point of view of what has happened later. So that's one point, and the other is that precisely when we needed, after the pandemic, more political action, really organizing after the trial of the pandemic, that we need to really stop neoliberal capitalism in the sense of that blackmail on the production and reproduction and life and ecosystems under such a destructive condition in which they do. We needed that, and then war comes to destroy all of that. So for me, it was, like I say in the book, it was a tipping point from the point of view of the urgency of intervention worldwide, in the sense of, after 20 years of saying neoliberalism is dead, social forums, global movement, the whole part of the 21st century that we have already crossed, it is now or never, because this war means that all those problems, but also the very problem of a war that is intertwined with not just a Russian-Ukrainian aggression war, but also inter-imperialist conflict, but also a systemic conflict between a questioned hegemon like the US and China. It means that there is no way of solving that war through of course, military victory, because that would entail a Third World War, but also not through traditional peace negotiation on a restricted zone, like apparently it happened in the Balkans. No, there is no restricted zone. It's about both imperial spaces of accumulation, but also systemic modes of power and governance over not just political constitutions and political structures in one country, but also about new supply chains. What Jason W. Moore defines the four chips. It's about who gets the control on food sources, on raw materials, on cheap labor force, and cheap nature. And that's it's a tipping point. The same way we speak of a tipping point about the climate evolution, climate system evolution. This is something that in which we either face as emancipatory forces the urgency of recreating a project similar at that of the Second and Third Internationals, with the exception that the Second International suicide itself because in 1914, because they promised to fight against the war, not killing between proletarians, and they did the contrary. The Third attempted it. The Third was formed after this successful Russian Revolution, and I think we are, but even on a larger scale, because it must be planetary, we have to face the same task. It's the same, all but simple task of because, as I say in the title of the book, this is not going to end in Ukraine at all. And of course, Ukraine, if this continues, is going to become a wasteland, absolutely. I'm pretty convinced of that because of a nuclear war, but also, and this is also likely because it will be abandoned by the West at a certain point, because the Ukrainian question, which is a long question that goes through the whole 20th century and our century, has always been prey to all those interests and imperialist interests. That's why Ukraine was never able to create like a normal Western or modern polity, nation state or whatever, because of other reasons, because the geography, it is a historic limes or limes, but also because it's precisely a middle earth between, a central power in Western central powers in the world system and semi-peripheral powers like Russia has been historically with regards to the world system. And of course the Cold War sort of simplified that and of course transformed it, because it was not just the continuity of autocratic Tsarism, but it was a proletarian and peasant revolution. And after that we came back to business as usual from the point of view of oligarchic modes of accumulation and power, disputing over such a rich country from the point of view of after the fall of the Soviet Union, a very well-educated, multilingual labor force, if we want to speak like that, but also from the point of view of natural resources, which is the interest of the West, because I don't think that Russia has any need for those, because, it's not what they lack of precisely. Fossil fuels, minerals, rare earths, it's about the spaces of power and influence.
Absolutely, and it's quite amazing. And it started with the Maidan uprising, which was in one sense democratic, and it was an aspiration of the mass of the people to change the oligarchic system, pro-Russian oligarchic system. At the same time, we saw an occupation or the change of trajectory of this revolution. it begins democratic and then suddenly it turns out in a massacre where like Professor Ivan Kachanovsky did some empirical research on it, and there is a massive involvement of the neo-Nazis, far-right sector, and so on and so forth, and then the government, and so on and so forth. This leads to my question is, how can we understand this? Because there are at least three sides. There are this Russian narrative that is saying, okay, we are defending ourselves. Today I was listening to a Lavrov speech, a debate in an Indian platform. I don't remember the name exactly, but he said, we are defending ourselves against NATO expansion, against the atrocities, against the prohibition of Russian languages. We are protecting our minorities. And yeah, he has some points, but that is not the whole story. And then we have this Western narrative that is also right. It is against the UN law and so on and so forth. And this is aggression. It's and so on and so forth. So we have both narratives, and then we have a third narrative: the people. But who asks the people? Nobody. It seems that they are not. Nobody cares for this, and especially this is in my interest. Is there a third narrative? Is there an alternative of this dichotomy of West against East and the both powers that are telling us the truth?
Of course, I mean, it's called political and social revolution in the sense that precisely that's what happened in Ukraine in 91, in 2004, and in 2014. The fact that, as Volodymyr Ishchenko, another sociologist of the Ukrainian political evolution, he speaks of deficient revolutions. In the sense that they attempted to change an oligarchy, not just pro-Russian oligarchy. The problem in Ukraine was that contrary to Russia, where the oligarchic chaos that started unleashed during the Yeltsin period turned into oligarchic stabilization through the introduction of the Siloviki. I mean, people like Putin, people Sila force in Russian from the secret services, the army, police, and so on. And they stabilized the polity in the sense that the big Russian polity, the Russian Federation, through war, by the way, in Chechnya and everywhere, through an autocratic war regime. And in Ukraine, that didn't happen because it was already a divided country because of the whole history I've spoken of. So what happened was that there was a divided nation dominated by clans or groups of oligarchs. Some, of course, the Western more pro-West, pro-NATO and pro-European Union, and the others because of linguistic and also relation with trade unions, and with patron-client relationships and so on. They were not exactly pro-Russian because that's a late development. They were more prone to have better relationship with Russia about mostly export of minerals, the gas dealings and stuff. But the problem with those revolutions is that they attempted to overthrow the whole oligarchic system, but they only were able to just change alternatively the clans that were dominated. It happened, in 2004. Then Yanukovych again won, and because of a suspension of a future agreement that Yanukovych more or less was willing to sign with the European Union, the suspension of it because, of course, of Russian pressures and stuff, the so-called Maidan exploded. But what happened was that the pro-Western oligarchs, equally corrupt, equally anti-democratic, seized power and started because of also of the Russian intervention, of course. The situation escalated, and the Ukrainian civil war started in 2014. There has been a civil war that has escalated into a major Russian intervention. Of course, we are here speaking of it precisely because of the Russian aggression, because, there are, even if they are not respected by most powers, there are certain rules, the United Nations Charter, and if you invade the country violently, it's a war situation. But the breeding of the whole issue started most profoundly in 2014, and you speak of what about the people. The problem is that the people is not united. There is, of course, the Maidan people, but at the same time, there is a consistent part of the Ukrainian population that don't agree with that. And the solution to that hasn't been a new plural constitution that, by the way, was in the program electoral proposals of not a new constitution, but a new national agreement in the proposal of Zelensky, respecting the Minsk agreements, reestablishing the plurilinguistic condition of the country, and so on. Because that's the only way to have a peaceful coexistence of such a diverse country. Unfortunately, the so cherished Ukrainian people is becoming, at least if we listen to the polls, because how do you know what the people think in a war? Listen to the polls or what the media says and so on, is illusioned by this war as a possible liberation, final liberation of that oppression, but at the same time we see a growing xenophobic attitude towards Russian culture that reflects symmetrically the same despise and anti-Ukrainian colonial attitude of many Russian officials and politicians, and also in the media. So the people as a constituent power doesn't exist in Ukraine from my point of view. In any case, we are seeing the building of a confrontation of different of a different folk, in the sense of a Volksgemeinschaft, which has nothing to do with democracy. It's about authoritarian, racist, xenophobic rule in both sides, and this is the current development that is nurturing civil war and the escalation of the situation. In this sense, the Euromaidan, because I would say of the intervention of both powers, Western and Russian, ended as a disaster.
Mm-hmm. I found in your book it was quite amazing, and you go into details. That was very fascinating. You deconstruct both narratives. You deconstruct this game of autocrats versus democrats, and you analyzed it with, if I remember correctly, with Luis Althusser. In the German version, I read it. It was the Überdeterminierung from the local conflict. Overdetermination, it's from the era. Yes, it is from the old Cold War era, where local conflicts was predetermined by higher force, by our empire.
Were controlled in the sense that they shouldn't escalate. It happened in Korea, it happened in Vietnam, it happened in the African wars, in Angola, in Namibia, Latin America, because of the Yalta division of the world. It happened also in Italy, for instance, and elsewhere, in the sense that even in a scenario in which the left wing or the Communist Party forces would win an election, it wasn't possible to change the state of affairs. So that's why NATO and the Soviet bloc wouldn't do anything about it, was ready to, like in Chile and elsewhere, to organize coup d'etat and sabotage and terrorism to create a situation. It happened, just after the war in Greece, where the partisans were ready to seize power, and Stalin precisely abandoned them because of the Jalta agreement. So.
Yeah. And this gave us a good explanation why we fell in I speak when I say we in the left wing, why the left is divided in regards to the Ukraine conflict. Not only the left party in Germany, for example, also I see it in my bubble, my anarchist friends, that there is this Antifa, which is pro-war and we need to fight fascism. And they got a good point. I mean, you can hardly argue with that. But on the other side, we have different, also from the Green Party. I saw the speech from the Green Party member Jamila Schäfer, in the German Bundestag, and she finished her speech with "Alerta antifascista, slava Ukraini," and this is quite astonishing. That this narrative is so central in the left debate, and also we have this opposite perspective, that is this some of anti-imperialistic actors fall into this Stalinist trap, or I don't know how to put it in words, and they sympathize with regimes like Iran, Russia, China, and so on and so forth, Cuba, North Korea, and so on, because of the same sentiment that they are against the US empire, they are anti-imperialistic, but that's not true. That's not the whole story, and this narrative is also a trap. And this is the strength of your book. And when I was reading it, I was thinking about my friends from from the different areas, and yeah, I was quite amazed that you gave such a great analysis, and people can grasp the traps.
Yeah, it was already a trap during the Cold War, in the sense that also in the peace movement you had also this component of pro-Soviet pacifists, no, that were against the U.S. imperialism as the only source of nuclear, and the Soviet Union was only defending itself and destroying the possibility of a better living conditions for the workers because of the arms race. But it also has to do with the fact that after the fall of the Soviet Union, I mean, there has been no revolutionary left except for the Zapatistas, I would say, and I don't know, I might be forgetting, but I mean, as a global project, as a comprehensive project, I don't see other than the Zapatistas and attempts here and there. I mean, that wave of struggles, you know, in the peasants in Brazil and India, for instance, of course, the feminist movements, the 2018 cycle, but we haven't been able to rebuild a real historical, solid and convincing project because, you know, I'm sorry, but that's the Gramsci adage, you know, the old world doesn't really end dying, and we still have to build another world. So in that confusion, I think that it is good for those dogmatic components, both Antifa, or to find a new clear-cut cause, which is about friend and foe, no? Freund und Feind. And that's what nurtures that passion, because we finally have a cause, regardless of the so dangerous, because it is.
You're a cheerleader for big power.
Exactly, you have said it. You are falling into the trap of a war regime that wants you to stop thinking about the consequences. I think it's so ridiculous that people, even in Europe mostly, in Europe, are looking at the conflict as if it was a football match, and not really thinking about the consequences of the real structures of military power, of arms power, of the possibilities of destruction. When somebody says, whatever, the Z of Zapowiedzi, no? until victory. No, the Russian side or Slava Ukraine, they accept the rhetoric of until the last man will get to Moscow or will conquer Ukraine. They are flatline from the point of view of their brains. Sorry, because that would be only possible on the basis of such a total destruction that the Second World War would be a joke in the sense of the implications, because of course it would become a world war with the current possibilities of destruction that are not only military, are ecosystemic, it's about communication, it's about food, and so on. So it is, I would say in many senses, it is a death thrive. Because otherwise it is not political reason as emancipation fighters were used to think of. No? We have to see that it is worth to die. But that's why the Second World War metaphor is the best, because Putin is Hitler and we are democracies. On the other way around, the boundarist Western collective is again invading us, and like in the Great Patriotic War, we have to fight to the last man, and so on. So this is the common death thrive from the point of view of passions and emotions that is absolutely instrumental to the real dealings and real stakes. Like I said, this inter-imperialism and systemic clash that are at the basis of the impossibility of solving this conflict by the powers that be themselves. It is us that must sabotage, that must destitute, that must overthrow the war regimes and the war governments, and that means, of course, a new anti-capitalist project, which, in my opinion, has to do with the refoundation of the communism as the political organization of social and ecosystemic life around a new mode of production, which is the common as something that is the sedimentation of centuries of capitalist dominated human and ecosystemic cooperation that we can, so to say, save and develop in different directions, in the sense that we are able to cooperate worldwide. It is a fact that we are able to solve so many problems on the basis of a different set of ethical and affective tensions, which are not about war, which are about cooperation, about love, about production of new things, and also of taking care of bodies and planets and animal species. And this is the new content of communism, but it's not, a flower power approach. We have to really be able to destroy these capitalist assemblages and apparatuses and operations. And now it is war as a new period of capitalist domination, because it's also a way of dealing with climate issues, with food and raw materials scarcity in non-democratic ways, because war is incompatible with democracy, and war regimes are incompatible with democracy. We see now in Europe, in Germany, and elsewhere, where climate activists do what it's always been done, like against war or against illegitimate operations. They do civil disobedience in Lützerath, and they are treated as terrorists, and also as war saboteurs, as fifth columns of the enemy. And this is what it is. It is what it is. The more we fight, the more we will be treated as such. But we also can be able, as we fight, being able to be effective, intelligent, non-prone to fall into the trap, and be able to sabotage the war effort everywhere, not just on one side. And that means internationalism, cooperation, and really getting out of this binarization of the situation.
So maybe we can stop here. I mean, we can go on and on. Your book is so great, and for example, this concept of Reductio ad Hitlerum. I mean, this is a great concept because when you analyze all the speeches from Strack-Zimmermann, Marie-Louise Beck in Germany, when you saw the speeches of Putin, I mean, this is absolutely correct, and your analysis is perfect. And also this figure Paul Manson and why some leftists turned into cheerleaders
for NATO revolutionary.
Cheerleader for
NATO revolutionary.
and
NATO socialist.
Maybe my last question, because I come from this perspective. What can we learn from an anarcho-syndicalist perspective? How can this solve the puzzles? You mentioned in your book the Wobblies, the workers' union. How can we overcome the war machine? I mean, there is a whole tradition of Gustav Landauer in Germany. I mean, How can this perspective help us overcome this war regime?
I think this perspective talks about the fact that there is no more a distinction between economy and politics and society. It is, on the one hand, a production that involves the whole life, production and reproduction of life. We are always, in a way, working. All human activity is already lebendige Arbeit, living labor, and the same, the capitalist operations exploit, oppress, control all those spheres of life, and that's a valorizing operation. It is abstract labor. And that means that organizations such as the Wobblies and others that don't separate the political and the economic, that are not just trade unions and not just revolutionary organizations, are the main example to deal with the situation. Because on the one hand, the peace movement, if it's only, or the climate is just an opinion movement and isn't able to sabotage production, mostly when it is becoming into war production of weapons and control and surveillance devices. This is already political, but at the same time it has to do with the issue of how do we earn our lives? Do we earn our lives into a war machine that is striving to death and the destruction of others, or we reorganize production and reproduction on the basis of another mode of production that is against war at the very core of its essence? I think that's the point. And the Wobblies were an industrial industrial workers of the world, not national, not racial, not whatsoever. And that's the world we have to pick up to go on fighting. I mean, and to challenge this situation. I think it's a good example. But also, of course, you have to add lots of layers of, for instance, the anti-colonial struggles, the ecological and feminist and LGBTQI, because those are dimensions of expressions of the powers of labor force, considered as something that produces and reproduces life, because production is about the ecosystems now. It's not just about the transformation of some matters, it's transformation of ecosystems, of minds, and bodies, and it is a capitalist production now, and this capitalist production is meant to war from now on. Is the solution, non-democratic solution to those accumulation of crises, and it's so important to made to sabotage that organization in the making.
Thank you very much for this talk. I enjoyed your book, and I hope that many people will read it and get the lesson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josef.